Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this podcast episode on this supposed live streaming channel. Today I'm speaking with Jared, a friend of the channel, and the owner of the now offline Legends of Men website. First things first, how are you doing today, Jared, in your part of the world?
Oh, I'm doing very good here on the East Coast of America. Just mowed the lawn this morning and I have some pretty bad allergies, so if I sound like my nose is clogged, excuse me a little bit.
Okay, well, you heard it from him first, folks. In England, it has been raining on and off, as it normally does around August. So many of you regular listeners will know Jared Trueheart, and you'll know of the Legends of Men website, and you may have noticed that the website a couple of months ago was taken down, and this included an article of mine which I had shared on the YouTube channel, but is now no longer accessible. So I recently made a video entitled Sexual Reductionism, which is a video version of that essay which I wrote for Jared's website, Legends of Men, and you can now watch it on the main YouTube channel. Now, Jared, for all those listeners out there who were fans of your blog and fans of your articles, could you please explain the decisions and thinking process which led to the termination of your website?
Yes, absolutely, no problem. Let me go back a couple years. I started it in 2017. In 2018, or was it 2019? I believe it was 2018. There was some backlash. I was working at a university at the time, and I was also a graduate student at a university. Well, I guess some of the students, they Google everyone's name in the administration if you work at the university for whatever reason. So they Googled my name, came to my website, Legends of Men, were offended by any number of articles, reported it to the higher ups, and they worked with me. They said, it's your First Amendment right, but we don't want to offend the students. So at that point, I was already sort of on thin ice with work, but I revamped the website, removed my name from it, and I went by a different name at the university. It wasn't a legal change. It was just hey, go by your middle name instead of your first name. That way, if anybody researched me, they wouldn't trace it back to the website. Well, I think that was 2018. For as long as I had the website, it was growing very, very nicely. And going up into April of 2020, this is near the beginning of the pandemic, keep in mind. Going up into April of 2020, it was growing faster than normal. It was always growing, but now the rate of increase was increasing itself. So at that point, April 2020, we're talking about, I had about 350 new users a day and growing. And it was about 120,000 Google impressions a month. It was going very well. May 4th, Google changed their search algorithms, not surprisingly, to promote more mainstream news websites and demote blogs, independent writers, etc., etc. Over the course of the following few months, I went from 350 new users a day all the way down to 100 new users a day, 25,000 only Google impressions a month. They set me back years in terms of growing the website. And around that time as well, Joe Biden got the election here in America. And so what I decided at that point was that it's just not working. Also, I should say that Bluehost is very, very sneaky in that if you renew your web hosting services through them, they don't renew it as it was when you bought it. They add on all kinds of stuff and you have to go in and tell them you don't want this stuff, it doesn't renew exactly what you wanted to renew. So I didn't know it, but I was paying hundreds of dollars a year more than I thought I was going to have to, because for that reason. So I didn't want the website. In the new Biden administration, it seemed to me that the wokeness, that the liberal outrage, for lack of a better term, was only going to increase. I didn't want to deal with what I had to deal with before. I didn't want to deal with it again. So I decided to shut down the website. It wasn't growing anymore, unfortunately. And that's why I shut it down. I'll give you a good example, King or Penguin. I'll give you a good example of one thing I'm talking about. I used to share. Now, keep in mind, this is not even a Google thing. This is a Facebook fan group thing. I used to write an article about Conan the Barbarian or something, and I would share it to various Facebook groups that are related to Conan or his creator Robert E. Howard or the genre sword and sorcery, etc., etc. In 2017, 2018, when I would share something like that, it would be a huge boost in people who want to read content about Conan. Huge boost. 2019, 2020, when I would share something, it would not really move the needle. I would get some clicks over to it, but most people in those groups just did not see it, and if they saw it, they didn't click for whatever reason. Now, that is not counting the fact that by summer of 2020, I had been kicked out of most Facebook groups because my takes on Conan, sword and sorcery, whatever, were simply that it's a masculine genre. And on the one hand, people accused me of bringing politics into it, which I don't think that's true at all. There's no talk about policies or politicians or anything like that. It said it's a masculine genre, and even when it was completely neutral in terms of cultural issues, just analyzing literature for the sake of it, I was still kicked out for that same reason. Now, keep in mind that these same Facebook groups were happy to promote anything that was left-wing. So some people would share a story anthology celebrating the fact that all the authors in it were minority writers, racial minority writers. And those sorts of things, you celebrate that, you could share that. But if you say Conan is the most masculine character ever written, and then there's some sort of problem. So I was getting kicked out of even the Facebook groups, and then the ones I wasn't kicked out of, they didn't want to hear me. So there was really no path for growth that I had used in the prior years. So at that point, it just seemed like it could be more of a liability than I need to deal with. So I shut it down.
So that all to be honest, that sounds dramatic. I think to our viewers and listeners should keep in mind that as well, the actual political situation in America is a bit hostile at the minute to individuals who have our kinds of takes on the internet. Was that a factor in your decision making?
Oh, absolutely. It was. I was more concerned about those same people trying to learn who I am in real life and make phone calls. Since then, I have graduated with a master's degree, and I stopped working at the university, so I've had to get a real job, and that's it. I've got a family to support, so I can't really let the website or my personal opinions or insights be a liability, even though I don't think that they're very extreme. Apparently other people do. So yeah, and it might be one thing if the website had continued to grow, and then my audience continued to grow, maybe I could find a way to bring in income from that, but it just didn't happen.
Well, you don't want to be that individual who has this obscure website, and it has one article which maybe 10 people have looked at, and then an 11th person looks at it and goes, "That's it. I'm going to dox this individual. I'm going to contact his employers and get him fired because he said that Conan is a man's man."
Yeah, it's exactly. And I remember I got one very angry comment on an article that I had written stating that you're familiar with the Iliad, right?
Oh, yes.
So I wrote an article saying that there are a lot of feminist books reinterpreting the Iliad. One of these feminist books, and it's not a secret that it's a feminist book. The author is a proud feminist. But in one of these feminist books, it's written from the perspective of Briseis, who is a captive slave woman of Achilles, and what she sees is a deep, passionate love affair between Patroclus and Achilles. And I said that the whole gay angle of Achilles and Patroclus is just propaganda to stop men from having deep friendships with each other, because they feel like if they have a friendship that gets too deep, it'll be gay and icky and ooh, we're too close to each other. Well, some person didn't like that article, and they were pretty outraged that I would have this opinion, this take on it. I still hold that opinion. I mean, we could go into it if you want, but it is a people like that who are so offended by such an interpretation of literature, they can cause damage that I couldn't afford to deal with.
These people always travel in packs, online, offline, etc. And unfortunately, they have a massive system which will support them because essentially they have no power in and of themselves, but they always contact the people who do, and then they make the moves.
Yeah, they seem to have a network of people with no lives. So they just hop on some Discord chat or something and say, "Help me dox this person," and next thing you know, you got a dozen losers dedicating their lives to exposing one person for having the quote unquote wrong opinions. Yeah, I've got a life to deal with, so I can't combat them.
Revenge of the soy boys against the Chad blogger. Unfortunately, for all of us, that is actually a reality we have to deal with. Obviously, they pick on targets which they think they'll have more success with. But yeah, this is actually something I think which will become increasingly an issue as the years go on, because things seem to be intensifying online and just in general.
Yeah, well, keep in mind that I was not outrightly censored. First, I was censored in the sense that Google and Facebook suppressed how people could find my writing. And they did such a good job of it that they didn't have to cancel, my website. They just suppressed me in the search results, or suppressed which people saw me on Facebook. And then from there, I end up censoring myself because it just wasn't worth it. And if you need a reference, a similar thing happened to the website Return of Kings. Roosh V was the owner, editor, writer of that website, or curator, I think you could say, all of the above. And they censored who could do business with the website in terms of ads, how many people saw the website, et cetera, et cetera. And then at some point, he just looked at how much income he was getting from it, what worth he was getting from it, and said, this is not worth it anymore. And so he shut it down. Well, something, vaguely similar happened to me, and that I ended up censoring myself, all because there was just no hope for growth and there was only liability at that point.
It's kind of disturbing because I've noticed there that YouTube and Google are trying to employ similar tactics for YouTube. I've noticed over the past part, for half a year now, that there are comments under my videos which will just disappear. Now, a few of them I look at and think, okay, maybe the commenter got embarrassed by his take and he deleted it. But other times it's literally, hey, that was a good video, thanks. And it gets deleted. And other times I've actually tried responding to comments and I type in the wrong word and that reply gets deleted, so I have to rewrite it. I was actually in a debate under a comment thread on one of my videos with an individual, and I wrote the phrase LGBTQ plus, and the reply just didn't go through. I then changed the term to alphabet soup, and the comment went through.
They're so tricky with it. They're sneaky.
Oh, they are very underhanded. So, yeah, they're very underhanded. So, they're taking these techniques and applying them to YouTube channels, and I have to wonder how this has affected my impact on the scene. Because I've had people comment and just say, I wasn't notified, and I clicked the bell. I did everything to get notified, but I just found this randomly browsing through YouTube. I didn't get anything in my notifications or in my email.
Yep. I am not surprised. You cannot now build an audience on the internet. And I don't want this to sound defeatist, but this is just how I see it. You cannot now build an audience from the internet unless you already had an audience, or unless you are like diehard leftist woke materials, if that's what you create. If you have, for the lack of a better term, centrist opinions, it just won't go anywhere because you won't the promotion algorithms, like you watch this video, you may like KingEmperorPenguin. Even those won't show you. So it's almost impossible to start a YouTube channel on, that provides commentary, for example, that will grow simply because your voice in a sea of voices, even if you're better than the rest of the rabble, you're not going to get promoted. You're going to be lost in that sea. And this is how I think most of the censorship works. It's not outright, we're going to cancel you. It's just, we're going to leave you in with the rabble. And if a few people find you, who cares, whatever. But a huge audience will never find you.
The thing I've noticed YouTubers doing, to be honest, like, success on YouTube is often luck as much as anything else. You make that one video and then suddenly people pay attention to you. But if you don't have that lucky break, nothing happens. So yeah. There is that. But for people who already have viewers, it's obviously easier to maintain an audience and keep growing. But I think a lot of YouTubers have inadvertently bypassed the algorithmic suppression, this underhanded, pseudo censorship, by simply chasing after the trends in pop culture, which is something I see on Critic YouTube a lot. So the recent fiasco and hurrah about the new He-Man on Netflix and the new Starfire comics. Everyone knew what these things would be. I don't think anyone was under any illusions that they would be good shows or they would be good comics, but they know what will attract viewers. and it's outrage over the latest pop culture material.
Yeah, that sounds. I think that's a real possibility, and I think you're right about the Critic YouTube. They could have written their scripts before they had ever watched He-Man, and then as soon as it aired or came out on Netflix, they have the video 90% made.
Well, you have to. You joke, but I think there's a very real possibility that they at least had half a script before it even aired. Simply because all you have to do is write something like, "It's woke now." There's a feminist narrative in it. The old ones were better. Oh, He-Man has been ruined. I mean, if I look, so I'm looking at Overlord DVD's channel. He has 268,000 subscribers, and his recent videos, which are at the top of the page when you type in his name, are all about He-Man, and they are basically just about, oh, He-Man is ruined, He-Man has been abused, and then there's the other narrative of, about Disney, where Disney is apparently panicking because Black Widow hasn't made that much money, and all this type of stuff. And to be honest, like, his latest videos are like his other videos. The content and the format and even the narratives within don't really change. The main narrative for Overlord DVD, in particular, is that these guys are ruining pop culture. They're ruining our stories. But by boycotting them, by hitting back with boycotts, by supporting apparently good pop culture, and by making making critical reviews, we'll get back at them. And eventually they'll go woke and go broke, essentially. That's his narrative. And it's just repeated over and over and over again. And still Lucasfilm hasn't fired Kathleen Kennedy. And still Lucasfilm has not gone bankrupt. And still Disney is the monolith which it has always been in our lifetimes.
Yeah, well, Critic YouTube, I don't want to say they're exactly low intelligence people, but they're not looking beneath the surface. They're still thinking from a rational economic perspective of, if this loses money, then they'll stop doing it. But they haven't gotten it yet. Disney doesn't care about money anymore. If they need money, they'll get money. Remember when Netflix had all the outrage about cuties because it was, pseudo pedophilia, it was really approaching that line, and people boycotted, people canceled Netflix. Netflix is still around. They're still putting out the He-Man propaganda. Netflix doesn't care if you cancel. They're a thing. They're a part of the system. If they need money, they'll get money somewhere. They really don't care. And not only that, if you're not a subscriber to Netflix anyway, why do they care what you think? So this whole idea is it's very on the surface. You have to dig a little deeper or just remember the same thing with what was it, Schick or Gillette, one of these face razor shaving companies. They did their toxic masculinity ad. I saw something that said they lost like $4 billion from that. That was years ago. Well, they did another toxic masculinity ad not that long ago. They didn't learn their lesson because they don't care about the money. They don't care about the money anymore. They're all a part of this system. Critic YouTube is old, stale, no real thoughts. It's an echo chamber. There is something really lame about being too outraged about He-Man. He-Man, was an 80s cartoon, and it wasn't very good even then. I saw reruns of it when I was a kid. It wasn't very good even then. I think it's perfectly fine to say, look at the woke propaganda within it, but to be outraged by it is just very lame. And these people don't move the needle. There's a, how do I want to say this? Persuasion, to persuade someone, Aristotle said the strongest tool you had was ethnos, which was, what is your character as the person trying to persuade others? Are you honorable? Are you strong? What have you done in your life, etc., etc. Critic YouTube does not have a lot of people with a good sense of ethnos where you want to hear what they say because of who they are. The one exception I might say to that might be Critical Drinker, who I don't usually put in the Critic YouTube, even though it's in his title. But when he does a review, and I think he did do a review of He-Man, which I didn't watch because I don't care that much. But the Critical Drinker, he's an eloquent guy, which you don't expect from a Scotsman, and he's
So- oh,
and-
sorry. Okay.
That's
continue.
why that's why I said it. And if you see him, he's a good-looking dude. He's fit and he's in shape. So when he says something, you kind of respect his opinion. The rest of Critic YouTube, who cares? They're so lame and stale and outraged over the wrong things. They're pretty much irrelevant.
I find it funny that you went there and actually said He-Man wasn't that great anyway.
Yeah, it really wasn't.
I've never watched it, to be honest. I've always looked at it and said and thought, well, it's an advertisement for toys. I mean, it's just a hyper-capitalist sort of product with a bit of creative energy in it, and I've never been able to reconcile that fact and view it as anything more than an advertisement. I didn't grow up with He-Man. I grew up with actually Transformers. And Transformers is the same thing. It's just an advertisement with a story which happened to be, somewhat creative, somewhat enjoyable. But I've never been able to reconcile those type of facts. And
I was just about to say Transformers was the exact same thing, but Transformers was so much cooler than He-Man, though.
I'll take your word for it. I mean, there is something fun about big machines which transform. There really is something kind of cool about that. But yes, there's not much I disagree with what you've said. I like Critical Drinker as well, and I partially like him as well because he actually writes his own stories. He writes his own books. He does. To be honest, I don't think he plugs his books enough in his videos.
I agree. I didn't know he was an author for most of the videos I watched of his.
Well, no, he doesn't actually mention it in his YouTube channel. He's mentioned it on his Twitter several times that he writes books, but I think he should really, like, at the end of every single video, he should be like, "Oh, by the way, I write books." I really think he should do that. But that's why I have to respect him, because he isn't just an armchair critic. But everyone else, I mean, you've said you didn't want to say that the critics on YouTube are unintelligent. But to be honest, I don't think it's an issue of intellect. I think it's an issue of, let's just say, comfort zones.
Okay.
Where it's the case of they'd actually have to dig a little deeper, and the deeper you dig, the more disturbing everything becomes. I mean, for one, you don't get to maintain the fantasy that you can boycott these studios into oblivion. You don't get to maintain the fantasy that anything which goes woke automatically goes broke. And you sort of get to, and of course you get to ignore the fact that there is such thing as too big to fail, and government bailouts, which will, because to be honest, if Disney was going under, do we honestly believe that the US government wouldn't bail Disney out?
Well, no, but the thing about these private companies is that, at least in America, they are almost all of them in debt. And this is expected from big businesses. You go in debt to do a big investment, and then the big investment later pays off. So there's always some element of debt that could theoretically be paid off right now if need be. So what I'm getting at here is that if Netflix or Disney or any of these, huge companies started losing a lot of money because of wokeness, they would get bailed out by central banking. And then, as we saw in 2008 and 2009, central banking gets bailed out by the government.
All connected to the Federal Reserve, essentially, and the other branches of the US government. And of course, money is just printed, really. It's fiat currency, isn't really based on anything. So yeah, just these companies continue, they endure. And that's a depressing thought. And really, the only solution, or the only acceptable course of action, let's say, the only course of action which has any chance of any kind of success, is actually to make your own culture or make your own artworks, your own art, etc., and your own media, which Critical Drinker, to his credit, is actually doing. But the rest of Critic YouTube, okay, so one, not all of them are writers and artists, and that's actually okay.
Can I jump in here real quick? Because
sure.
Just like you were saying, the only solution is to create your own culture. Well, I have to say, much like the Critical Drinker, I also wrote fiction books, and I'm not going to say they were very good. They were something that I wanted to read that I didn't see was out there, which I'm sure is the same thing Critical Drinker, how he decided to write as well. But in any case, the point is that I wrote them, I put them on Amazon to be sold electronically. Just like we were saying earlier, how big tech companies don't have to censor you, they can just suppress you so that people don't find you. In the giant sea of online content, what you create can also be suppressed in just that same way. So, my books never got a big push on Amazon, and I tried to promote them through my website, but they never got a big push through Amazon. Now, I don't know if the Critical Drinker puts any money into advertising, or even if he has to. He has something like 900,000 YouTube subscribers, but the point is that you create something culturally, a cultural product, but who finds it? This is the hard part. You want people who wouldn't normally find it to be able to find it, but that doesn't happen. Only the people who would search for it, search hard for it sometimes, only they find it. So you end up creating a sort of cultural echo chamber rather than changing the culture around you.
Yeah, I have several thoughts on this. So to continue my point, so not all the the YouTube critics are artists, and that's fine. But the second part is a lot of them are not willing to actually search for the other media or art they might enjoy. So they will continue, for instance, going on about Star Wars. At this stage, I'm so disappointed that anyone is talking about Star Wars. I'm sorry, but look, I did it. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I criticized the Star Wars sequels. I don't regret a single minute of it. But there is a time to say, and now I have done my bit. It is over. I can only boycott. I can only ignore. I can only move on.
Yeah.
And the fact that some people won't move on shows an attachment to corporate, and they are corporate IPs by this stage. It shows an attachment to corporate IPs, which is unhealthy, obsessive, and stops them from actively searching for the media that they might enjoy from independent authors. And to go back to your point where it's like, where you were stating that it sort of produces its own echo chamber because it's people who are finding them, and you don't get to the general public. This is true. You sort of have to start with a clique or a fan base to begin with before anything can become mainstream. And yes, truth be told, even if you say, I will write my own stories, I'll create my own films, I'm not going to, orbit the pop culture anymore, it is an uphill battle. You're fighting against Amazon if they don't like your books, and you're fighting against corporate media, such as this latest He-Man, and everything else. So even that's an uphill battle. But it is certainly more productive than making another video about how Kathleen Kennedy will be fired soon. I promise, guys, Kathleen Kennedy will be fired soon. There's a new rumor.
Well, I have to agree with you, and especially, you're right. I would dare say a majority of these people just want to bitch and moan about the cultural products that have gone woke and how they want it to go back to some former glory rather than going out and finding something better. I think you are correct about that. The hard part, though, is getting something like I can't, but getting that fine cultural product into, just for say a Netflix style TV show that then gets promoted on Netflix, and then people everybody has Netflix at this point, just about. And then somebody on Netflix looks at it and says, wow, this is great. This is so much better than He-Man or something like that, The hard part is getting it out there, making it in demand. And of course, just as you're saying, these people, YouTube critics and their nerd fan base, they're not helping by continuing to complain about Star Wars. And it just doesn't go anywhere. That's its own echo chamber. You're right.
Yes, it's quite, to be honest, I think it's quite tragic what has happened. What has happened to Critic YouTube? Truth be told, it has, just as you've said previously, it's gone stale. Like, I don't need to watch Critical Drinker's latest video. I don't need to watch Overlord DVD's latest video. I don't need to watch those videos because I was part of this, so I know all the talking points.
Yeah.
I know all the talking points. I know what the narrative is. I know what they'll discuss. I know what will be an issue. As soon as I saw, for instance, on Twitter, the Marvel comic fans and fan base are seething over I Am Starfire, which, if I've not paid much attention to it, but if I am correct, it's basically a comic where there is someone who has Starfire's powers, but I'll just show a screenshot of this character, drawn to be as aesthetically unpleasing as possible. And of course, they're all going mad, describing how woke it is and stuff. And I just have to say, well, did you expect anything different? Why do you even care? Why do you even care? You still have the old Starfire stuff if that's what you're into.
Yeah.
And then of course, and I've noticed as well that when Marvel Comics does a blunder, which it's doing all the time now, still hasn't gone bankrupt. Strange how everything goes woke, but it doesn't go broke. So whenever Marvel Comics does a blunder, such as the new Heroes a couple of years ago, and which was just hilarious, and then this I am not Starfire. I think it's actually called not I Am Starfire. I am not Starfire. They always say something like, well, manga will rise and more anime will rise. But to be honest, like, manga, yes, it's not woke. I wouldn't describe manga as woke or anything, but manga has all its own problems. Manga is so cliche. So many manga and anime releases are trope-ridden, cliche, Because there's a meta genre, there's sort of a meta genre for manga and anime.
Yes.
And this meta genre, so it doesn't really matter what genre you're writing in. If it's supernatural horror, if it's, I don't know, murder mystery, if it's action, if it's isekai, or in another world adventure, it's always going to involve, it's almost always going to involve secondary school aged children, so teenagers.
Yeah.
And it's going to inevitably have accidental gropings of a female's breasts.
Yep.
It's always going to have a fantastic weak anime male. My term. I'll put a link in the description for that video. And it's always going to have that. It's always going to have either like a tsundere, a kurere. I've actually forgotten the others, a yandere, etc. It's always going to have those type of female character types. And the power of friendship is always going to be the major thing. They're all going to be, like, the men are all going to be awkward with women, and the women are really going to be awkward with men, romantically, I mean. There's no alphas or chads in anime or manga, it seems, anymore.
Well, I'll take one exception to that, which is this is a trope, which is just like you say, the fantastic weak male. Anime male. He's the protagonist, even though he's the weak one. But then the Chad is actually the female warrior who's always right next to him, and she's the one who kicks all the ass, and he's on this like journey of growth, as if the female next to him, the female warrior, is full grown, and he's this teenage boy who still has to figure it out. And in the meantime, he's fantastically weak and especially awkward.
Well, the funny thing is, he's weak, like, from a personality perspective and even from a physicality perspective, and yet he still has great powers. He still slays mighty monsters, etc. That's the paradox or the contradiction. So you have a picture of Conan the Barbarian as your icon. So when I look at that picture of Conan the Barbarian, and someone says, yes, by the way, he killed a giant spider, I look at that picture and I go, yes, I believe it.
Yeah.
I look at someone like, the main example I used was Belle Cranel from Is It Wrong to Try and Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? Season 1.
Okay. Yes.
And he slays a giant gorilla, like a king, like basically a King Kong. And you look at him and you say, no, you're lying. This young teenager who isn't bulky or physically imposing, who is, easily bullied and manipulated, this guy, he never slayed a giant gorilla, except he did. So he's somehow he's somehow weak, but he's also fantastic. So when I hear and this is going back to my point about I'm not Starfire. So when I hear people say, look at these disgusting Marvel comics, I go, yeah, they're disgusting. And then they say, we will read manga instead. And I have to say that's not an improvement.
Yes.
Yes, it's more aesthetically pleasing, but it's like a stale meta genre. It really isn't like that. It's almost like it's what I think really is that Japanese artists and Japanese animators have created the perfect formula for anime and manga production. And they're using this to great effect, not only in Japan and places like South Korea and China, because nothing goes to North Korea. They're also having great success in Western countries, such as the United States. And it's just a formula. Like, I would hardly say any of it is really creative or, pioneering or innovative or just different or just, has a creative spirit in it. It seems like they've just perfected some formula and they're using it to great effect for, Western audiences and the native Japanese audience and, of course, South Korea.
Well, I think what they've really tapped into is a formula that appeals to the teenage or even young adult audience, especially in Japan. Now, let me tell you, I lived in Japan for 3 years when I was in the Army. I was stationed there. I have seen high school students male high school students. They are really thin. They look physically weak. They look timid. Their body language looks timid, like they're always shy. I think what anime and manga has done is found a formula that appeals to these types of young men, and sort of, and you did a great one on Sword Art Online, which is the, how anime appeals to these losers online, my term, losers online who fantasize about being able to be heroic all because they play video games. In that same sense, the manga anime producers have found a way to tap into that fantasy of teenage Japanese boys, their fantasy of being the weak, emotionally and physically weak, yet still be the hero. And that has translated to America as well, because we have so many more young men in America who just live their lives online or play video, or their lives are video games, meaning that they play video games all day, every day, and they have no physical presence. They have no strength of character, and so those same stories now really appeal to a Western audience, just like they do the audience of Japanese teenage boys.
I have to agree with the analysis. It's funny, you say, well, you've seen teenage boys in Japan who just look kind of docile and submissive. The only thought which popped into my head is, when you said that, was strange. It could be a description of some English schoolboys, I suppose. I think Japan is worse. I think Japan might be worse. From what I'm hearing, from what I've read, I get the impression Japan is worse than most of the Western nations. But to me, it always seems like if there's a problem in Japan, which is big, it always exists in the Western world. But it's more, what is the word I'm looking for? It's more subtle, let's say. That's not the word I wanted, but it is more subtle. So if there is a case of like people, schoolboys in Japan who haven't had strong father figures, let's say, or haven't had good masculine role models, that problem exists over here in England and in other Western nations, but it's a bit more subtle.
Yeah, well, I think you're correct in that. From what I've seen as well, the problem that I described a minute ago is more extreme in Japan, in the sense that it is more common to see Japanese teenage boys like that, meaning weak, physically weak, and weak in character, docile, etc. It's more, or also addicted to online, addicted to video games, addicted to manga. It's more common to see that in Japan than it is in the West, although in the West it's growing. I think that is more extreme. Although the difference, I would say, is Japan has in America, I think one of the problems that cause it is presence or lack thereof of a father in the home. And in Japan, a lot of families do have a father who comes home, but because of Japanese culture, the father just ends up spending his life at work or in the office rather than being a strong presence at home, even if the father wanted to. It's a consequence of Japanese culture, whereas it is not a consequence of American, for example. It's not a consequence of American culture. So even though the problem is different, or the problem is more extreme in Japan, I think the cause of it is different. And in any case, I agree with you that the whole sentiment of trying to say, well, American comics are too woke, we'll just turn to manga. This is also folly, because it is not. They're not any better. They're not woke in the sense that we know it, but you're not going to find a strong masculine protagonist, slaying a dragon or anything like that in manga either.
I mean, you find it in some of the older manga, but that's not what people are gravitating towards, unfortunately.
It's not
And
the trend.
no, and the other thing is they go to manga, they go to anime because one, it's aesthetically more pleasing than basically anything coming out of Marvel Comics, and second, because they just want their entertainment. I think we both have this view where we look at art and we say it should be inspirational and it should be aspirational. It should have inspirational models and it should have aspirational models. It should inspire people and people should aspire to be what is in the work. I mean, and some people do get this, like Literature Devil, on Critic YouTube. I think he gets this. I think he does get this, and his recent videos, I think, have actually been quite good in this regard. But I think most critics on YouTube don't. And most people who follow these critics on YouTube don't. They're not looking for masculine role models or even feminine role models, or heroes who have virtues and the exploration of vice and virtue, etc. They just say, I want a relatable protagonist, and I want action, I want entertainment, I want stimulation, which is why they move to manga without question. When, I mean, the most recent trend was they were gathering round, a lot of people were gathering around this Please Don't Bully Me, I can't remember the character's name, but basically it's an anime based on a manga, as usual, about a girl who bullies this boy, who she teases and bullies this boy whom she actually is attracted to. And I mean, it does happen, but the problem is the boy in question he's not even a fantastic weak anime male. He's just a weak anime male from what I've gathered. And he just takes it. Like, he doesn't tease back. He doesn't bully back. He doesn't set boundaries and say, look, that's inappropriate. Stop it. He doesn't retaliate. He doesn't act like an alpha Chad and just, roll with the punches or anything. No, he just takes it, and it's and it's unbelievable, because no girl or woman is going to, respect or be attracted to a guy who, rolls on his back and just takes whatever she throws at him. But that's the thing they're going on about, and they're like, oh, it makes feminists and woke people angry, and that's another reason why it's good. And I'm just like, I just don't care. It's like, I don't care if feminists are angry about Don't Bully Me, what's her name? I don't care. Why should I care if feminists are angered by it?
Well, they have such a weak interpretation of art. The leftists always interpret it through a woke lens. How diverse is it representing women? Well, in this case, is there bullying, etc., etc. It's all very surface, and it's a very weak interpretation. The fantasy, the part where fantasy is separated from reality, because there are, I'm sure, lots of cases of young meaning teenage or preteen girls, maybe picking on a bit boys who they like, maybe because they're more mature, and the boys are not yet there, which is common. The fantasy is that when the girl picks on the boy and he doesn't fight, he just rolls over, that she'll still be attracted to him, and that all the bullied weak teenage boys then relate to the fantasy of their bully actually being attracted to them, and then somehow this turns into a romantic relationship. Now that's the fantasy. Of course, it's so far removed from truth as to be pathetic, but But if all you do is focus on the aspect of bullying, you will never get to the fact that this isn't about bullying at all. It's about the nerd fantasy.
What I would add is that it's basic. It pains me, but to say this, because this is really unhealthy. But it's the fantasy that you, as a guy, you can be a pushover, you can be weak, you can be essentially unmasculine, you can be a sad and sorry individual, and yet, you'll get women who will be attracted to you anyway. You don't have to improve, and it's quite frankly a toxic fantasy, because one, it isn't true, and two, even if it were true, even if you could be this way, and get hot women fawning over you, you still are, at the end of the day, a weak individual, a weak guy, not a man, and that's no way to live.
And you can't have any self-respect at that point. So it's like you're sacrificing your dignity for the affection of a woman, even if it were true. But so I agree with you completely.
And I think this is where we should pivot, and because as we have discussed, there are a lot of guys out there who haven't had positive masculine role models in any shape or form, and some of them sort of stay in the sad state of a lot of anime and manga fans, and then others turn to the internet and they discover the Manosphere. And I wonder if you agree with me here. In my experience, the Manosphere and all its connected nexus of blogs, videos, etc., going through them, it's always a case of sorting the wheat from the chaff.
Oh, yes, 100% agree with you. And the problem is, what is your criteria for that sort of separation? And especially if you don't know what to look for, you can get sucked into the worst elements of it.
Well, if you're clueless and you're just looking for advice, which is the problem.
Yeah, that is the problem. And there are very few people, even in the Manosphere, which also now called the YouTube Men's Community Association, the YMCA. But there's a lot
nice one.
This whole online men's improvement community, there are very few people who will tell you that you need to get off of the computer and find a mentor in real life. The people who would tell you that, I mean, there's really no money in that, in telling people that, which is, the greatest advice, to be completely honest. The greatest advice you could give as a men's improvement online figure is to say, find a mentor in real life who would be willing to work with you and tell you the truth as they see it about you. And usually this would come in the form of like a sports coach, or maybe a more mature workout buddy, or just maybe a older
martial
person,
artists,
a martial artist, an older person at work, anything like that. And I'm not saying it's easy to find these people if you don't know where to look, but that's number one. And nobody's going to tell you that, not nobody, but very few are going to tell you that in this community. It's a lot of separating the wheat from the chaff is hard, because it is now a source of primary income for a lot of the people in it, and so they don't want to lose their income.
And of course, a lot of them want to pretend that they have all the answers to everything, which we all know isn't true, because some of them is like, I in England reading a lot of Manosphere stuff, it obviously references a lot of American culture, a lot of American situations, and some of that doesn't translate very well into the England scene.
Yeah.
And if you were in France, like I'm technically part of the Anglosphere, but if you were to live in France, it would be even different. And same for Spain, Germany, Eastern Europe,
Yes.
etc., or Italy. So basically, a lot of stuff that some of the guys talk about isn't even directly applicable, which is one of the problems. And the second part is how, well, do we say his name? The cult of personality, which surrounds one particular individual who's unfortunately a big figure in the Manosphere.
I say it.
It's that guy who has the Messiah complex. And by the way, this isn't an exaggeration. This isn't hyperbole. Rollo Tomasi has a Messiah complex. I'm going to show on the screen now a couple of screenshots of his tweets. For this reason alone, nobody should listen to him. The man has issues, let's say, and he has delusions of grandeur. To be honest, I've read a lot of his blog, and basically what he says isn't. I mean, it's a simplification of women, a simplification of men, and it is, quite frankly, just toxic for everyone involved. There is no reason to believe that he is happily married, as he claims to be.
No, no, definitely not. I don't believe it for a second. He speaks in generalizations and sometimes in universals. But for the most part, he speaks in generalizations that are unfounded or at the very least unhelpful. Usually when you do a generalization, it's because it's helpful for us. We play the odds, so to speak, while understanding that there's a possibility that whatever you're talking about could defy the generalization. With Rollo Tomasi, the generalizations don't help. And with the Manosphere in general, the problem with red pill content especially, which is a big part of this men's improvement stuff, is that it will have a lot of good advice, stuff like work out, respect yourself, respect your body, look good, make money, dress well, all kinds of great advice, none of which needs to be accompanied by all the other advice, the stuff that says like, all women are like that any woman can be a hoe on the right day, or that there's no benefit to a man to being married, or just for example, or keep your finances separate from your future wife's any of that stuff. So the good advice is attached to the bad advice. There's no reason that it has to be attached that way. You could get that good advice elsewhere. And this is the problem with a lot of the men's improvement content, which is that it's attached to that sort of bad advice. And then the other advice, because it's attached, people who find it end up taking it all wholesale rather than trying to understand this, trying to discern the good stuff from the bad stuff.
Well, they swallow it hook, line, and sinker half the time. Is your book, The Red Pill Ideology, still on the Amazon store?
No, it is not. But I'll tell you what: if anyone wants a copy of my critique of the Red Pill Ideology, just email me at legendsofmen2018@gmail.com. Email me, and I'll just send you a digital copy for free.
Cool. And if anyone wants to look at a review of that book on YouTube, I've made one on the main channel. Fair to say, I think you got most of you in that book criticized the most important facets of what you termed the red pill ideology. Rollo Tomasi's his sort of variant of it is especially horrific in its simplicity. Because I don't know if you listened to it, but there was a live stream between Rollo Tomasi, Richard Cooper, and Shawn T. Smith. Rollo, and Richard Cooper had a debate upon hypergamy, and Shawn, he has a YouTube channel where he's actually made videos attacking the red pill conception of hypergamy, and he does a fantastic job. In fact, basically all his videos are worth watching on YouTube, so I'll just have a link in the description. And he was debating Rollo Tomasi and Richard Cooper on this. And he basically, the position Tomasi and Richard Cooper had was, oh, well, women are always motivated by their hypergamous instincts. They're always hypergamy maximizers or hypergamists. That is the root of all their behavior. It's all these biological drives which have evolved over time for reproduction. And Shawn gave an example saying, this is something I've seen a lot in my clinical practice. Materially and economically successful couples, I have seen women desperately try to stop their husbands from abusing drugs or taking lots of alcohol, and they'll stick by this guy for a while. And in the case he was describing, he said, and in the end, this woman, she divorced her husband because he was a constant alcoholic. And even though it didn't hurt their material prospects, she couldn't handle it. The issues which came from this guy's alcoholism. And Shawn just asked, where does hypergamy describe her behavior here? And Rollo Tomasi was smart enough to keep his mouth shut, but Richard Cooper, unfortunately, is not so intelligent. And basically spoke for Tomasi and all of the red pill hypergamy cultists, all the disciples of Rollo, and just said, I misremembered what Richard Cooper said during the live stream. I have written corrections on the screen for the listener/viewer to read. Well, clearly it's hypergamy because, this would have hurt their material prospects, and she wants a guy who will make more money. I can put the live stream down in the description. It is, if you watch and listen to it with any amount of critical thinking, you'll just realize that it is a live stream where Shawn makes Richard Cooper and Rollo Tomasi look like idiots.
The Rollo crew here and now, it is not growing really. They
Thank
are
God.
Yeah, thank God. It has peaked, and too many people like myself, though I'm not the only one, not by a long shot, have critiqued their beliefs and their whole belief system from a perspective that is not feminist. And so when you do that, you're showing that, look, this isn't me being a feminist here. It's just your ideas are bad. And enough people have understood that, and they sort of distanced themselves from it. That being said, emotional guys still appeals to them, and it will still appeal to emotional guys in the future if they can find it. However, it's largely an echo chamber now, with very few coming in, but I think more people leaving it. And you might not know it to look at the YouTube live stream views. They get a lot of people to view it, but it is dying slowly. And ironically, I think the only reason it is even promoted by people like YouTube is because the YouTube ideology the red pill ideology is essentially liberal, in the sense that it calls for freedom of action, freedom from moral decisions, freedom from moral consequences of their actions. So at the same time, it tells that, women are sluts and you shouldn't trust them. It also tells men that, hey, you should just go for it, be as promiscuous as the women. Why not? That's the only thing propping it up anymore. Of course, it's not the only part of the men's online improvement group, writ large. It's just the easiest to criticize, I think, at this point.
Yes, and it's also partly easy to criticize as well because a lot of the guys, like I mean the viewers, etc., a lot of the guys who hang around that section of the Manosphere or the red pill ideology, whatever you want to call it, the people who hang around that section, they tend to be self-described MGTOWs and incels because they embrace it because they then have something to blame other than themselves for their problems. I used to have pity for MGTOWs and incels, but I have lost all pity at this stage. And the only thing I can say to them is, could you please do something else with your time other than complain, right?
Yes.
Anything else. Look, I don't care if MGTOWs want to remain celibate their entire lives. I don't mind. Just please stop whining about things. Go and do something productive. And incels, it's something similar. It's like, well, that's hard. I feel for you, but could you please do something, anything else, but go online and complain about it? I know guys, right, who don't have girlfriends and haven't had girlfriends for ages. They do not describe themselves as incels. They do not complain relentlessly about how they don't have a girlfriend. They get on with life.
Bro, that's like almost every guy in their 20s, I mean, it's one of those crazy things where, if you're in your 20s and you have a girlfriend, all of a sudden you feel like you can get girls, you're really confident about it. But then once you don't have it, you go long spells of, not not having a girlfriend. That's just one of those things. The MGTOW side of this is it's sad to the point where you don't want to pity it anymore because they have so much self-pity. But it's odd because you said that a lot of the people who sort of prop up the Rollo group is the MGTOWs, and there's definitely a lot of truth in that. But there is an odd thing happening in the manosphere right now. Are you familiar with the 21 convention?
Yes.
For those who aren't, it was essentially a manosphere convention. It's been around for a while and it's still continuing. Rollo Tomasi used to be a part of it. The owner of the convention, Anthony Johnson, he kicked Rollo Tomasi out of the convention because Rollo invited a New York Times reporter named Nellie Bowles to to come speak to him while he was having dinner with some of the guests of the convention. Now, doxing was the big problem here. They don't, the photographer came. Anthony didn't want the guest to be doxed, rightly so. Rollo knew this, yet he invited the reporter anyway. It was a whole debacle. Rollo kicked out. Anthony and Johnson are split now in terms of these things, even though Anthony Johnson still essentially holds a lot of red pill beliefs. Recently, though, what has happened is that one of the other speakers of the 21 convention, Donovan Sharp, who was formerly very, very much aligned with Rollo Tomas, he did not leave when Rollo left. He stayed with the 21 convention. But recently, Donovan had a split with Anthony Johnson as well because Donovan made his own competitive men's conference called the Conference of Masculine Excellence. Now, when this happened, essentially, Donovan tried to metaphorically kneel and kiss the ring of Rollo Tomasi and say, please bring me back into your good graces. He, did a video where he dedicated the conference to Rollo Tomasi, even though Rollo Tomasi did not participate. At the same time, Anthony Johnson is going on this wild video spree, making videos about Donovan, calling him a fraud. And there's a lot of evidence that, he is. A lot of evidence that I think people who used to follow him would not like to see. And at the same time, Anthony Johnson has aligned with MGTOW Dictionary big time. So now it's Anthony Johnson and MGTOW Dictionary sparring with Donovan Sharp and Rollo Tomasi, even though a lot of these, they hold a lot of the same beliefs and views. Almost all of them have these same beliefs and views. It is you don't know. This is when if you were new to the internet and you came to this online men's community, this is primarily what you would encounter, and you wouldn't know how to make sense of any of it because almost all of them hold the same beliefs as Rollo Tomasi.
I'll ask you which beliefs in particular, but in a second. But I'd just say that if you were a newcomer, right, you're like, you have a bit of self-reflection. You say to yourself, maybe I shouldn't read all this manga filled with fantastic weak anime males. Maybe I should, level up on my manhood and stuff. It's like, well, I've heard the Manosphere, blogosphere is handy in this situation. And then you go and see this internet drama. I mean, how do you navigate it? Because at the minute, from where I'm standing, it looks like chaos. It looks not exactly like chaos, but it just looks messy.
It is messy. And if you're new to it walking in, I don't know how you make heads or tails of it.
I think you walk out, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because it just looks like, to be honest, it not only just looks like, it actually is a bunch of big egos hitting each other really hard.
Very much is. And, a lot of the other men's figures in this group, they have aligned one way or another. And so many of them, I'm just going to say it from my perspective, so many of them are frauds that I don't know how anyone still follows them, even by their own admission. I'll just give you an example. Jack Murphy. So Jack Murphy is first famous for writing an article about this. It was something like the untapped secret of exotic and erotic energy or something like that. Long story short, he sends his girlfriend off to have sex with other guys, and he promotes cuckoldry. He's the cuckold, and he likes it, and he says you should do it. He takes that article down, sort of reinvents himself as a conservative figure, goes back to the 21 convention. Anthony Johnson has him back after knowing that he has published this article, by the way. So now he's a speaker, supposedly conservative values, etc., etc. Well, in the whole split between Donovan Sharp and the 21 convention, Jack Murphy chooses Donovan Sharp because of Anthony Johnson's personality, essentially. That's my assumption. So what does Anthony Johnson do on Twitter? Well, he says, I can't believe, something to the effect of, I can't believe we have these cuckolds promoting cuckoldry in the Manosphere. At which point I said to Anthony Johnson via Twitter, but you did invite him back to your conference as a speaker, knowing that he wrote an article promoting cuckoldry, right? Well, at that point, I was promptly blocked. So I didn't get to see any response to that. But this is the first level of fraud, which is that we got a cuckold, reinvents himself as a conservative, but because he is on the wrong team, the people who did like him and promote him no longer like him and promote him. And then one of the screenshots I sent you, and you could it was a tweet that I sent you. You could feel free to share it if you like. The same guy, Jack Murphy, who, by the way, has blocked me a long time ago on Twitter. Jack Murphy, from about a year ago, saying, hey, masks are no big deal. Stop being a problem. Just put on your mask. And then another one, just put on your mask already. Get over your own ego. And then now he's tweeting that you should not wear masks, that you should resist the government. It is the fraud, the blatant fraud, or at the very least, the lack of consistent character, lack of virtue in these people is so much so that you really can't trust many of them when you learn about them. Another example is Hunter Drew, the family alpha, who now goes by, oh, by the way, who heavily promoted the word authenticity, live an authentic life, be authentic, etc., etc. And of course, at the time, Hunter Drew was a pseudonym. So now he goes by his authentic name, Zach Small. And at the time, he was promoting all this authenticity, etc., etc. He didn't know that he had a problem with alcoholism. And so now he has reinvented himself as a sober person. He's very sober. He can't believe he did all that other stuff being drunk. And it's like, well, if you listen to him while he was doing all this drinking, wouldn't you feel a little cheated that now he stopped drinking and now you're supposed to listen to him both sober and not sober? I don't know. I would. So to me, there's a lot of people in this space who put themselves out there as to say, look at my life. I am an authority figure in helping you improve as a man. But then when you dive into their lives a little bit, you realize what a disappointment they are.
There is a lot of first of all, this reinvention of oneself for marketing and internet success purposes, this flip-flopping, etc. I mean, Anthony Johnson, for instance, as you said, he invited a guy who he knew had written an article on how great cuckoldery was. And when this is pointed out, he just goes, well, that's embarrassing. I'm going to pretend nobody pointed that out. And Anthony Johnson, I swear, he goes on a switch. I think once you annoy him, he'll just do everything he can to crush you. Which to be honest, is what everyone seems to be doing. I have to say, I think the Manosphere at this point is a complete embarrassment. I wouldn't.
Agreed.
I wouldn't want to, like. Who would I recommend? We're going to have to go to that. Find a mentor in real life, please. Stay away from the internet. I think that's got to be the advice now. I have a question here because you said Tomasi, the MGTOWs, and even Anthony Johnson share some of the same beliefs of Rollo's red pill ideology or his branch of it. Which ones were you referring to, or which ones seem obvious?
Oh, certainly the most basic ones, which is that we live in I forget his terminology, but it's a feminine-centric culture.
I think it's gynocentric, is it?
Gynocentric culture, that the feminine imperative is toward hypergamy, that the court systems heavily favor women in custody battles and legal battles, even in criminal legal battles. That's a lot of the foundational stuff that they all share. Oh, and then they share a lot of the same opinions on feminism and its effects. And then now they've come to a point now where they also are promoting a lot of like traditional women, like women should be traditional women, but they don't live to it. So, just for example, Anthony Johnson will go on Twitter and heavily promote traditional women, stay virgins, learn how to bake a pie. So, find a man and don't have sex with him right away. All this sort of stuff. He'll do that 1 minute, but then on the next minute, he'll talk about how he goes on sugar baby websites and finds a lot of girls to bone.
Is this Anthony Johnson?
Yes.
I haven't seen those tweets, but
I've heard him speak about it.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Just for example, another thing, AJA Cortez and Anthony Johnson will do is talk about building a legacy. Both of these guys are dudes who could have children and they don't. So whatever their legacy is, they're telling other people to do. They don't do it themselves. But foundational beliefs, they're still on the train that culture is gynocentric, women are hypergamous, the court system incentivizes women to divorce men and take money from them, and that all women are like that essentially. So they all still share these beliefs, these sort of core foundational beliefs, but the infighting is more about money than anything, which should tell you that this whole space is that a lot of people who are heavy into these space and have those foundational beliefs are mostly in it for the money at this point. And I could probably name a number of people who don't share those foundational beliefs, who not consequently or not coincidentally, they're not in it for the money because they're well off enough otherwise. But if the people have those beliefs, which all the groups I named before do, then they're pretty much in it for money, and the only split is regarding money.
This is an interesting view to take, but as I hear it, the more I have to agree. Because Rollo Tomasi has a ridiculous sentence. I mean, he has many, but this one in particular, I always thought was a bit insane. And it was, "She's not yours, it's just your turn."
Yeah.
I mean, that's true if you're going to a club and you're just banging harlots.
Yeah.
But that really isn't true in any other context, practically. And again, that references that all women are like that. Anthony Johnson, for instance, he allows this guy who says, "Oh, well, she's not yours, it's just your turn," to speak on his stage, which, that stuff is mental. And then the thing which gets him kicked out is because Rollo is accused of attempting to dox some individuals. And actually, looking at some of the narrative surrounding that, it's actually more messy and less clear cut than what it's portrayed as by Anthony Johnson, which I never thought I'd say, but there is a deeper layer to this. And I think, as you said, it comes back to money. Because even while the investigation into whether Rollo had actually intentionally tried to dox some individuals, he had signed him on for another talk, and he had signed him up for the Red Man group, Anthony Johnson, that is.
That is correct.
So something doesn't add up here, because you wouldn't sign on a guy who you were investigating if you thought that several months before he had actually attempted to dox individuals to a feminist New York Times reporter.
Well, to be fair, I don't think the thought was that Rollo Tomasi was trying to intentionally dox the guys who went. I think the thing was that it was just a really negligent decision, because if somehow those guys' pictures were published as attendees, that they could be doxed. So it's putting the attendees in a situation to be doxed, which is irresponsible. So I think that was the accusation all along. But let me put it to you like this: Anthony Johnson knew what Rollo Tomasi was all about. Had him. So we say had him on a stage. Anthony Johnson has said it's much deeper than that. That they had talked either by phone or text message almost every day for years, because Rollo Tomasi was part of this 21 convention for a couple years. So it was a lot deeper than just I have him on my stage. They were really in it together. And yet, at the point when Anthony kicks him out of the 21 convention, he has endless screeds, Rollo Tomasi, all the bad things he can say about Rollo Tomasi. He says them publicly. But as you said, he has clearly had these opinions or these thoughts about him for a while. Yet Rollo Tomasi continued to speak at his conventions. Now, the same thing happened. The timing is not 100% clear to me, and it is a bit messy from, having spoken with some people who are a little closer to it. The timing is messy. But the main point is that the same thing happened with Donovan Sharp, where you're willing to call Donovan a fraud after he has created a competitive conference, and you're willing to say all these bad things about his character at that time. But how long ago did you know about his character, and did you continue to have him to speak on the stage? These are the big issues. And it's more than just that Donovan Sharp made a competitive conference. It let's just say it looks eerily similar to the 21 convention. I don't know if it looks legally similar, but apparently that'll be hashed out in court. But the point being that when they serve the purpose of the 21 convention, they're in it and there's no problem. But when they're not in it, all of these questions about their character are highlighted. And so there's a hypocrisy there of, if you're going to talk about these people's personal character, then you need to kick them out before there's a problem and say, hey, I kicked them out because of what I learned, rather than after there's a split and it just looks like it's a problem of money and not a problem of character at all.
And this leaves to be the big question of, well, where the heck is the Manosphere going? Because I don't think it's going anywhere, and I think it's made itself irrelevant by all these activities. It's just it appears to have split into several different groups, and it's a clash of egos. And I don't know about you, but at some point you hear the critique of feminism, you hear the critique of the court systems, etc., and you go, okay, I've heard this 100 times now, so what now? For instance, Anthony Johnson never stops banging the drum on feminism. That stopped being, I don't know, productive years ago. I think everyone has heard that critique now. But it seems that nobody has moved on.
Well, I agree completely. But anyone who was gonna move on did move on. I think for Anthony and for other guys in this community, prior to banging the drum of feminism over and over, you had it was more focused on pickup, meeting women, picking up women, and things related to that. So maybe working out, maybe dressing well, etc. Once you move on from that, how are you going to frame what you do? And so I think for Anthony, especially, being anti-feminist is something that, with the spirit of the larger narrative, it works with the spirit of the larger narrative of anti-wokeness. But as you say, it just gets old so fast. Not only that, to say, okay, feminism is bad. Okay, I agree with you. Now what? Well, there's nothing. That's kind of just the end of it, and it goes nowhere. And so, if you see this now, I think you're right. I think the Manosphere is making itself really irrelevant, because people are slowly understanding that there are other voices that are not framed in terms of the Manosphere, in terms of men's improvement, that are more valid to their own lives and more beneficial in that way. So I think people, if they want to search for that, they're not going to the Manosphere anymore, because the content is repetitive, it's deeply flawed, and it's so schismatic. Where's the separation? The separation is not around beliefs. Not for the most part. The separation is around egos, where the money is going. And once you really dive into that, you have to step away from it.
Yes, I'd agree. I hope, to be honest, that people slowly start going away from all these figures in the Manosphere, because to be honest, I just can't see it helping anyone anymore.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, but it's largely a grift now, and a lot of people started making money from it full time. And I think when you do that, you become a slave to it almost, So you can no longer progress, in a sense, because if you progress but your audience does not, then you lose money. And once that's your sole source of income, you have to sort of placate to that audience. It's become very repetitive, I think, for that reason.
I mean, this is now the big question, I suppose, and this counts for Critic YouTube, which is suffering from a similar disposition, and the Manosphere. If you're an individual, a content creator or whatever, in either of these two spheres of Critic YouTube and / or the Manosphere, where do you move from here, either as a consumer of the content or as a creator of the content? Like, where do you go? Because both of these places at this stage are dead ends.
I think you have to be creative. For example, George Bruno is somebody who I follow, and he was part of the 21 convention. There was a split with the 21 when when Anthony Johnson found out that George had agreed to speak at the Conference of Masculine Excellence. And, I can't go into too many details, but there was a split there. George spoke at the Conference of Masculine Excellence. Since that has taken place, George has really kind of taken a step back from all this men's improvement stuff, and he's searched and I think found ways to speak to a primarily male audience where he does not hold where he does not repeat the foundational beliefs that all the other groups have, where he finds ways to speak to men, and to a lesser extent women, that does not rely on those foundational beliefs, but that is designed to help them in one way or another. So that's what George has done, and I think he's been successful at. And as long as he's separate from those, those other online men's improvement groups, I think he'll have a big audience for that reason. For the Critic YouTube, I think you could do something similar, which is, how do you critique what you see in a way that avoids all the tropes of, new movie is a remake of an old movie, but with wokeness. That's what happens now with Critic YouTube. So how can you find a way to be able to critique what you see without falling into the tropes of critiquing it from a position of wokeness or a position of, hey, this isn't what I already know and love? I think you have to find a new angle to take.
Easier said than done, but all these things have to be done to, I don't know, actually help the individuals who are drifting by on the internet.
Well, I'll just give you a quick observation. Like we were talking before we hit record on what is all the He-Man controversy even about. We haven't watched it, and we haven't watched what the critics say about it. I don't understand what the big deal is, but apparently one of the problems is that the females in the show look like men. Well, man, the Tokyo Olympics are going on right now, and I don't know if you've seen some of these women, American women, who are competing in the Olympics. They look like men, and they were born women. They had the runner who made headlines here, Sha'Carri Richardson. She has a man's face, bro. She looks like a dude. Or the big American gymnast, Simone Biles. She has a man face. So what's the big deal if in He-Man, the females look like men? To me, they just look like Olympic athletes because the Olympic athletes look like men. Am I wrong here?
I think if we dug deep and asked them, we would eventually reach this presupposition: women in fiction have to look feminine and have to be feminine, which, by the way, is not something I disagree with, but they typically never argue this. What I've found is they tend to just say, well, they're doing this because it's woke, and they're not willing to make the argument that women should look feminine and should not look like men in fiction. They're not willing to actually dig deeper and actually give their arguments for that.
Have you heard anyone have a take like I just said?
I don't think so, no. Like, I haven't heard, like, here's the thing, there are some progressives who will have takes like that. They'll say, well, if a woman took steroids, or if a woman had these genetics and she worked out like an Olympic athlete, she'd look like this. So actually, what's the deal? You'll get progressive YouTubers who will say stuff like that. You won't get that from Critic YouTube, not the guys I'm thinking of. Typically, they'll just say, it's like, this just looks bad. And it's like, well, yeah, but what reason do you have for them to look another way? They won't give one.
Yeah, they're so stale. If they broaden their horizons a little bit, maybe they would have something new to say about it. When I tell people that that the Olympic athlete women, and I'm not talking about your beach volleyball, athletes.
Well, no
I'm
one
talking,
does when they mention these things.
yeah. I'm talking about your track and fields, or to a lesser extent, your traditional gymnasts, or weightlifters. I mean, these women look a lot like dudes anyway. If you just said that as a critic YouTube, I mean, maybe you'd have something new. You'd be less stale. Or how about this? Have you ever seen a ancient Greek statue of a woman? It's a man's body with breasts. Okay? This is if you so my point is that maybe if you as a critic YouTube broadened your horizons a bit, you could have more to bring to the critic table rather than just this is woke, Star Wars bad now, you know. If you're able to broaden your horizons a bit in either uh, arena, whether it be the whole men's improvement side or the critic YouTube side, I think there's room to be creative, and hopefully, you'll get through the YouTube algorithms or whatever.
Well, one can only hope. We have been going for around 2 hours now.
So I think we're ending it on a good spot.
I think we have discussed all that we can to the best of our abilities, but do you have any closing statements?
No, no. King Emperor Penguin needs to make more videos. That's about it, because we all love him.
Well, I thank you. I'll have to actually get off my rear end.
Okay, get on your rear end and make videos.
The term of phrase didn't quite come through. Well, anyway, thank you all for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you all an excellent day.